Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today for this hearing. Mr. Aronson, I would like to start with you. You identified in your testimony 5 specific areas you thought were in need of further consideration related to our process here, and one in particular was data preservation requirements. I recognize your concern about the cost and logistics of maintaining the current data preservation that is proposed, but CIRCIA suggests that maintaining data in this way helps them to analyze information and come up with better long-term strategies to help prevent attacks. Would you share with us how long and in what way you recommend data be preserved?
Thank you so much for the question, Congresswoman Lee. So I would say the importance of data retention, that's resource intensive. And when we're talking about some of the statistics that you've heard, Mr. Mayor just mentioned a number. I mentioned a company that will remain nameless, but that thinks they could have as many as 600 a month. And that would evolve out to more than 65,000 over the next 9 years. That is a significant burden of retention. That's a significant burden on the resources that would be needed from a digital perspective. That's a significant burden from a workforce perspective, having to manage all that. So I think maybe a little bit more philosophically, juxtaposing incident reporting, which is mandatory, and information sharing, which is voluntary. The idea here is we're trying to glean signal from noise. And I don't disagree with CIRCIA's interpretation that more data could yield more information, but that's within reason. If we're talking about one company generating 65,000 reports over the course of the next 9 years, extrapolated over 300,000 potentially covered entities, how do you glean signal from that noise? How do you get or manage 2 years worth of that data? How do you manipulate it? How do you resource it? How do you have staff that deals with it? How do you have the digital infrastructure that can actually maintain all of that? Those are really serious questions and really resource-intensive challenges.
Is there a timeline that you think would be more appropriate?
So I think it's less the timeline and more the amount of data that would be requested. So if we can start to narrow down the number of reports that would be required to those things that are truly impactful and truly impacting truly critical infrastructure, then a 2-year time horizon is not untenable. But if you're talking about throwing everything against the wall, that's when it becomes a more resource-intensive challenge.
And you just mentioned something that was my next question, because several of you have touched on this subject, and that is the idea that the threshold for the reporting requirement itself you perceive to be overly broad, and that it's going to capture too many things, too much information. I think Ms. Hogsett referred to it as, what is a reportable event, and whether the definition there should be narrowed. Mr. Aronson, I'll start with you since we're already discussing it. Do you have any specific thoughts on how that definition should be narrowed? What should be a reportable event? So in particular, so it's the 4 prongs, right? And any one of them could trigger a reportable event. The phrasing loss of integrity and some of the supply chain aspects, that's a lot of things, without getting technical, but things like password spraying, things like any sort of impact on a cloud provider could impact integrity, could impact availability. That becomes a reportable event. Does that really matter? And that's the question that we need to ask ourselves. What are those types of incidents that we truly need to be collecting? Ms. Hogsett, let me hear from you on that same question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we refer to it in our past comments to CIRCIA as it should be with malicious intent. So if you think about an event that is having an impact and causing harm, and it's not just a technical glitch or a system misconfiguration that took things offline, I don't think those are the things that CIRCIA should be collecting on, but the way the definitions are currently crafted, it would capture that, and we think that that should be narrowed to accommodate that better.
And Mr. Mayor, do you have any additional thoughts on that threshold of reporting requirement?
We're providing services at 99.99% availability over the course of the year. what threshold would you lower that to make that reasonable? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's not, what could conceivably be every single type of outage that occurs, because all networks have issues. The question is, have you built in the resiliency, the redundancy to respond quickly and survive that? How resilient are the networks? I'm going to talk very briefly about supply chain because it's something I'm very familiar with through the task force. When you look at the supply chain and you talk about compromises, if we have to report events in the supply chain, we're not just talking about a static event. We're talking about everything from the design to the development to the production to the distribution to the operations to the maintenance and ultimately to the end of the life cycle. What we have to look at is where is the most critical event that's going to occur? What's going to be the immediate impact? What is the potential for some cascading impact? How big a part of the ecosystem can potentially be impacted? And that's going to be an iterative and evolving process. So we have to get to the place where we can refine the analysis and thinking here. And it maybe have a lifespan of 6 months. We may decide after 6 months, this is no longer a legitimate threshold because there's a new attack vector. That's the kind of iteration. That's where the collaboration with industry comes in. That's where the shared expertise and perspective between government and industry comes to play.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.